My name is Beth Berryhill. In 1984, I was on probation for being drunk and was given a year probation. During that time, I gave birth to a son who was born in August of 1984. My probation was violated because I was in the hospital and refused to go see the probation officer. She waited for 3 months before sending out a bench warrant, and when I turned myself in finally, after hearing about the bench warrant, the judge had told me to get 24 hours and find placement for my 2 children. My oldest child was about 18 months old, and so he went to stay with his grandparents, while my newborn child, at 3 months old, I'd asked a neighbor of mine who had her own children and took good care of them if she would take care of them for the 25 days that I had to go to jail. I gave her a total of $150, and in 4 or 5 days, I don't remember 4 or 5 days, but my check was going to come in, and I told her to bring it up to the jail and I would sign it over to her. She didn't have to use any of the money to take care of the baby because he owned everything, and if she ran out, she only had to run into my apartment and go grab more stuff. An hour after I was checked in or booked into the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, the jail, I got a phone call from CPS telling me that they had obtained my 3-month-old child and was putting him in foster care, and they wanted the oldest child. And then they told me that after I got out of jail, I could go down to the CPS office and they would return my children back to me. I did 25 days with the thought that when I got back out, my children would be returned back to me. And before that, I had no prior CPS involvement with my children. I got out of jail at midnight. At 7:30 in the morning, walked over to the local DHS office in Jackson and was informed by Dale, I think his last name was Wiseman, that I had to go to court and that they would review my case within 6 months, and I had to just take drug testing and stuff like that, and if I passed drug testing in the 6 months, my children would be returned to me. Went to court that afternoon. They took jurisdiction of my children, and so I never had a drug test after that. I went through, in the whole fight for my children, from November of 1984 till January of 1987, I had a total of 4 court hearings. That was it. The last court hearing was a termination of my parental rights, and at the time, I had a 3-month-old child living with me. I was working with a CPS worker up in Clare County. Her name was Patricia Parker, and she told me that she was going to go to court and say, look, you know, I think that the children should be returned home because she does a really good job as being a parent to the child she has now. Instead, we got to the court hearing, and I heard, if you send the 2 older children home, the newborn will be neglected. I was also deemed a drug addict. I've been drunk 1 time in my whole life, and that was February 9th of 1984. I appealed that, and I didn't get an appeal, and so I had to go on about my life because I had a 3-month-old child who was depending on me. Fast forward, I've had 2 children since then, and I fought CPS all the years to keep my children in my home because they just were trying to take them away because I had termination of the other 2 children. Got through raising my children, started college, got my associate's degree in criminal justice and was almost done with my bachelor's in criminal justice. 2007, my first grandson was born. Mom didn't want him. Mom wanted an abortion. I wouldn't let her get an abortion. I brought the baby home from the hospital. Got guardianship through the courts. They had to do a background check on me and run me through Central Registry, and in November of 2007 was not on Central Registry. As of October 1st, 2010, my daughter had had 3 prior phone calls from about CPS coming in, which had nothing to do with the grandson that I was raising. And she had a child abuse charge against her from 2010, which was on the child that I was raising. A CPS worker came in to investigate at the time he was 3 years old, he snuck out of a house that had child-proof locks. And he was playing in a sand area, he was playing in our driveway. We live on a private lake in a private community. Anybody who comes down our road is trespassing, that kind of area. The people removed my grandson off my property. Then they turned around and gave him to somebody who was just visiting next door, and that person took him into the house next door and held the child from me until the police were called. CPS came over the next day and investigated. CPS worker said, John McCarthy said, that he didn't see any reason that he would have to follow through, just, update the child-proof locks, because obviously the 3-year-old could get out of the child-proof lock, and he left. 6 hours later, he came back with a pickup order for both my grandsons and took them out of their beds at 9:30 at night. And we got into court, and they closed the case on me because the CPS worker said I was on central registry, which, as I said, in November of 2007, I had already had myself checked, and there was nothing on central registry, and I had the clearance on file. We go and we look, and we find out that there's stuff dating back all the way to 1980, when I put my son that I gave birth to when I was 16 years old up for adoption. He used all that against me, got my guardianship canceled, then turned around and got me taken off the case, so I couldn't do nothing about it. Since then, my daughter's had her rights terminated because they couldn't get the older boy to bond with her because she didn't get that bond. I got the bond by raising him. During the pickup of the children, I asked for the pickup order, and I was ignored. When they came to the door, my 25-year-old son answered the door, and there was 2 sheriff deputies and 2 CPS workers. And when they said they were there to get the children, my son had told them to wait, and he had to get me. And instead of them waiting outside the door, they followed him through the house and scared him. He's 6'7". He turned around, and he looked, and they were standing behind him. And I filed a complaint about that. And since then, I've been fighting for my grandchildren and fighting to get off central registry when I shouldn't have even been there. And every time I get a hearing that comes up, it gets postponed 4 days before my hearing date. And I was just informed that the only hearing that I really have to take care of is 1984, and that was the termination of my parental rights on my 2 children, that they shouldn't have never even been dissolved, because of the fact that I didn't have a parenting plan. I got 1 hour a week visitation. Most of the visitations were canceled on me by the CPS worker. I didn't have an agency working with me. I had CPS working with me, and he would call me and tell me it was canceled, but he wouldn't call the foster parent and tell her it was canceled, so it was looking like I was a no-show. I mean, it was a railroad, and they tried to do that to my daughter, and I was like, no, don't even listen to them. They're not your friends. You know, if they tell you go parenting classes, go to parenting classes. If you go to budgeting class, go to budgeting class. Psychological evaluation, you can take theirs, but go get your own. You know, I mean, everything that she was going through, I was trying to tell her, don't do it their way. You got to do it and show them that you're an individual. And everything she did backfired on her, and they still took her rights. She gave birth to my newest grandson on March 31st, and the judge told them that the baby was to be allowed to go home. Instead of the baby being allowed to go home, he was He was removed from the hospital and taken and put into the adoptive home, the potential adoptive home of the other two children, because they wanted to keep the siblings together. And even though the judges demanded that the child be returned, even to the newborn be returned to family, the agency is denying anybody any right to raise the baby. And he's sick right now, and he's not getting the kind of care that he needs. And I'm trying to adopt the older two children, but the family that have him now keep telling me that they are adopting him, both the boys. And both the boys, as of yesterday when I seen them, they don't even acknowledge that my daughter's their mom. They keep asking me about my daughter and had they ever met her. And it's only been a month since they've seen her. So I've gone and I've gotten all the records. I've even got confidential reports that the CPS worker and the police officers have written. And after I get done fighting to get my name expunged off a central registry, I'm going to keep fighting. I got to, because I have the confidential reports. I have the law enforcement reports that can back up everything.